Michelle. Obviously, you know what this stuff was all about, right? It's not a surprise that we showed up tonight.
Almost overnight, she went from a possible witness to a person of interest in the case of a missing mom of 5 from New Canaan.
We see state police, New Canaan police, searching downtown Hartford.
So what's that about? Why is the scene moved to Hartford?
You need to tell us what you know about Jennifer's murder and Forrest Dulos.
The girlfriend in the middle of a bitter and brutal divorce battle.
Stuff you were throwing out, we have. And it's all Jennifer. It belongs to Jennifer. Do you understand?
Turned high-profile murder investigation.
Guys, what happened to Jennifer, Michelle? You're gonna do the right thing, Michelle?
We're taking you inside the trial of Michelle Troconis.
And thanks for joining us once again for Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis on this Monday. I'm Shannon Miller. Here is a live look at Stamford Superior Court this morning, where the trial is picking back up after that long holiday weekend. Michelle Troconis faces a number of charges in connection to the death of New Canaan mom Jennifer Dulos, including conspiracy to commit murder, evidence tampering, and hindering prosecution. She has pleaded not guilty and maintains her innocence. Here are some of the evidence we saw in court on Friday. First, a blood-like stain on a paper towel roll at Jennifer's home. Then there's that mudroom door. A then detective with state police testified about preserving a fingerprint on the doorknob. He also said a blood-like stain was found there. Now, the arrest warrant states Forrest Dulos' DNA was found on a swab of that mudroom doorknob. Now, the jury also saw photos of the contents of Jennifer Dulos' purse, which was found in the kitchen with Jennifer nowhere to be found. My colleague Kevin Geis is live in Stamford for us once again ahead of day 3 of testimony. Kevin, what can we expect today?
Yeah, Shannon, it's more than likely that retired state police Sergeant Matthew Riley will be back on the stand today, but only after Judge Kevin Randolph decides exactly what the jury can see and hear as far as testimony from him. On Friday, the prosecution submitted a number of photos state police took while documenting the scene at Jennifer Dulos' home on Wells Lane in New Canaan. This is one of the photos shown to Judge Kevin Randolph, but wasn't seen by the jury yet. It shows blood-like stains in the garage. All of the photos have been admitted, so it's likely as then Detective Riley's testimony continues, the jury will see it. Judge Randolph is also considering whether or not to allow testimony about field tests conducted on some of the blood-like stains found at the scene that would come up while viewing the photos. Defense attorney John Schoenhorn filed more than a dozen motions right before the start of this trial, and this is how they're going to be handled. The judge will address each of them one at a time as the prosecution arrives at the evidence those motions pertain to. So similar to Friday, those motions could slow down this process a little bit. Every single time the judge needs to address one of these motions, the jury has to leave the room. The trial is set to start here at Connecticut Superior Court in Stamford at 10 o'clock this morning. Shannon.
Those pauses can kind of seem like forever there as you're waiting for them, Kevin. Thanks. Let's dig in more to some of those pieces of evidence and explain why each piece is so important. We know that a number of those scene photos taken by state police were presented in court on Friday, including those taken in Jennifer Dulos' kitchen. You can see Jennifer's purse in one of those photos here. It was found in the kitchen. Detectives emptied the contents out onto the table and then documented all of what was inside. There is cash, credit cards, personal items, a phone charger. Nothing identified so far as of out of the ordinary, except, of course, that if Jennifer left on her own accord, she left behind her purse, which is one of the reasons why investigators were concerned that something had happened to her. Now, another key discovery in the kitchen, seen here with an evidence marker next to it, the paper towel roll. Retired Sergeant Riley testified that he found the roll off the holder, and when examining it, he found what appeared to be bloodstains on it.
You indicated there was a blood-like stain. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Where was that?
It was on the upper part and on the inside cardboard tube of the paper towel roll.
Now, the paper towel rolls were mentioned in the arrest warrant as well. Police interviewed Jennifer's babysitter, Lauren Almeida, who told them about when she first got to Jennifer's home around 11:30 in the morning. Investigators believe Jennifer had been murdered. Now, Lauren noticed that the paper towel holder needed refilling, so she went to the pantry for a new roll and found just 2 of them left. Now, she found this, quote, incredibly strange because just the night before, she put a brand new pack of 12 paper towel rolls in the pantry. She told police she wondered what had happened, that they used 10 rolls of paper towels since then. So, Kevin, we knew about her statement from Troconis' arrest warrant, so we knew that the paper towels, again, at Wells Lane were important. But this blood-like stain on the roll that was never listed in the evidence outlined in the arrest warrant sent to the state forensics lab that came back positive for blood. Is there any chance that we may learn more about additional evidence not listed in the warrant?
Absolutely. As detectives sort of take the stand, as different investigators take the stand, it's more than likely that we'll continue to find different evidence that they found as they sort of canvassed the entire garage as well as inside her home. They've already mentioned a few things that we had never seen before, and it's more than likely that more things will continue to come up, more things that weren't mentioned in the warrants at all, but rather investigators just found to be odd or strange, but didn't necessarily warrant going into the actual arrest warrant itself.
Now, Kevin, one of the most talked about topics in court on Friday was about whether to allow testimony on that presumptive field test done there on some of the evidence found at the Wells Lane home. It's called the Kastle-Meyer test. It's been used since the beginning of the 20th century to detect the presence of blood. This video here from Florida International University shows how it works. A phenolphthalein solution is applied to the swab sample, then hydrogen peroxide is applied. If the swab quickly turns bright pink, that is an indicator of hemoglobin, the protein contained in red blood cells. Now, that would be a presumptive positive result. It's presumptive because there are other common substances that can cause a positive result, including rust, horseradish, and turmeric. Now, the defense argued that the testimony could confuse the jury and they would be left to believe everything in the garage was blood when it may have been a different substance that reacted to the test. But the state said since the defense has the ability to cross-examine the witness, testimony on those tests should be allowed.
Its probative value is completely outweighed by its prejudice, especially in light of the fact there is no confirmatory tests, and that when it is tested, it is not blood. So to let it in is the equivalent of allowing, as I indicated, that rust that the jury can infer that that was blood.
With respect to the prejudicial value, I don't think it rises to unfair prejudice, and counsel can cross-examine, and that will go before the jury.
Now, later in the day, when retired State Police Sergeant Riley started testifying about the testing he did on that paper towel roll, the defense objected, and Judge Randolph then dismissed the jury for the day. The judge then asked to hear the prosecution's questioning of the witness to help him make a decision about whether to allow that testimony.
Obtaining an immediate result, positive result, that bright pink color. I noted it as such. Then later, I packaged the roll of paper towel and noted the positive field test on the evidence label.
Now, Judge Randolph said he had some concerns about the testimony, including what a positive result on this presumptive test actually means.
There can be a positive indication for other than hemoglobin. So the term positive indication by itself, the court is understanding the testimony to mean positive indication for blood. So just to say positive indications would be misleading. The court understood the testimony. Even radishes can render a positive indication.
So, Kevin, Judge Randolph had the long weekend to think about this. Do we think that court will start today with the decision on this?
If they're going to bring retired Sergeant Matthew Riley back to the stand, his decision will have to sort of go first to decide whether or not the jury can hear and see this different testimony. Now, the judge noted the defense has the opportunity to cross-examine this witness and sort of hit on that exact point, that maybe it was something else, that original presumptive field test rendered a positive result, but the prosecution is ultimately going to have to decide whether or not they want to continue to push this witness to give them more testimony on those results.
And one piece of evidence presented Friday, Kevin, was the door to the mudroom, that doorknob, and specifically that doorknob when processing the scene on Wells Lane Then Detective Riley took swabs on the doors of the home, a particular interest, again, this doorknob here, and what investigators found on it.
Pretty clearly visible a fingerprint. And then on the reverse side of it, we saw what possibly looked like some blood-like stains. So, I mean, given what we had seen in the garage during our walkthrough, we found that this was probably a pretty valuable piece of evidence.
Now, Detective Riley then removed that doorknob to seize it as evidence and did a test to preserve the fingerprint on the doorknob. And the court, he pointed out that the area where the fingerprint is visible. And what's on that doorknob is important evidence. The arrest warrant highlights what was tested for DNA and came back with a match. Swabs inside the mudroom doorknob came back for Fotis Dulos' DNA. Both Fotis Dulos and Michelle Troconis were served search and seizure warrants on May 31st, 2019 to obtain DNA samples, fingerprints, and full body photographs. So Kevin, talk about Fotis' DNA being found on that door. Why was it concerning to police that his DNA and fingerprint was found at that Wells Lane home?
Yeah, Shannon, absolutely. So in the original arrest warrant for Michelle Troconis and Fotis Dulos, it was made very clear that the babysitter was interviewed, Jennifer Dulos' babysitter was interviewed, and Fotis Dulos was not supposed to be anywhere near going inside of her New Canaan home. It was made very clear in an earlier interaction that the babysitter had with Fotis Dulos. He was supposed to stay with the kids outside of the house after he was supposed to take them to a picnic, and then when he found out that the farm he was supposed to be taking them to was closed, he actually went back to the house, but he was kept outside the entire time. So to have his fingerprint on a doorknob was absolutely a concern based on the arrest warrant for investigators.
Yeah, that last time that Fotis Dulos was at the house, just days before Jennifer's presumed murder. Now, the first witness that we heard from on Friday was Sergeant Jamie Pierston with the Connecticut State Police Western District Major Crime Squad. She testified about her role of mapping out the garage during the investigation. That map includes measurements from the scene and notes where evidence is found. Now, she was also responsible for processing Jennifer's Chevy Suburban, which is found near Waveney Park in New Canaan. She documented everything found inside the vehicle and what was not found, a custom liner that later proved to be a key piece of evidence for police.
Of the 2017 Chevy Suburban, did you determine if there were any WeatherTech liners in the vehicle?
Yes.
What do you mean by WeatherTech liners, or what are we talking about? So we're on the same page for what a WeatherTech liner is.
Yes, it's a custom formed, but it's a hard rubber mat that protects the vehicle floorboards, interior vehicle floorboards.
And were those custom mats inside the vehicle?
Yes.
Where?
The front left and front right had individual ones, and then there was a very large mat that spread from the second row passenger to the third row rear passenger. One large mat.
Was there a WeatherTech liner in the trunk of that vehicle?
No.
So as you just heard, that WeatherTech liner was not in the back of the Chevy Suburban. We later found out in the arrest warrant for Michelle Troconis that video surveillance from cameras on Albany Avenue in Hartford, quote, showed Fotis Dulos remove what appeared to be a large rigid object from the rear of his Ford Raptor and lead it up against a building. An object that was consistent with the appearance of a WeatherTech brand rear cargo liner determined to be missing from Jennifer's 27 Chevrolet Suburban. That's a quote from the arrest warrant. So, Kevin, the theory from investigators is that Fotis Dulos dumped that liner because it had evidence on it. So why is it important for the jury to hear that it was missing?
Absolutely. The prosecution is essentially building a larger case here involving both Fotis Dulos and ultimately down the line Michelle Troconis. We asked Attorney John Schoenhorn on Friday point blank, when do you expect to hear Michelle Troconis' name come up? And he said it would likely be a little while. So the prosecution is building this massive case, essentially proving there was a crime that was committed, showing the jury exactly what evidence there was to support that there was a crime committed, and moving the process along so that the jury can understand that this was a larger entire scheme that ultimately led to the conspiracy to commit murder charge against Michelle Troconis, and moving toward those Albany Avenue videos that we have of the Raptor dumping evidence inside some trash cans on Albany Avenue in Hartford. Shannon.
Kevin Geist live outside Stanford Superior Court for us today. We'll hear much more from you throughout the day today. We appreciate the latest. We are bringing in the experts to bring you inside the trial of Michelle Troconis. Coming up next, I'll sit down with attorneys Trent Lima and Michael Fitzpatrick to talk about the strategy for the prosecution and the defense so far. Stay with us. Welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. I'm joined by two veteran defense attorneys in Connecticut, Michael Fitzpatrick and Trent Lima. Thank you both for being with us today. First of all, can you explain how the testimony so far continues to lay this groundwork for the jury that an alleged violent crime has occurred here?
Well, it's obvious that the prosecution is proceeding in a very methodical manner. They need to establish that Jennifer Dulos is no longer alive, that a crime occurred, and that the perpetrator was Fotis Dulos. If they can't establish those two things, which they have to do brick by brick, then they're not going to be able to tie Michelle Troconis into any particular crime.
Yeah. There's a lot to absorb here just initially from what investigators say that they've seen there. Let's talk about this issue of this Castle-Meyer field test. We know evidence from Jennifer's home was eventually sent to the state crime lab, and DNA was found for both Jennifer and Fotis Dulos. So why is John Schoenhorn pushing to bar this testimony about the presumptive test if DNA testing was eventually done?
Well, John Schoenhorn is a very experienced defense attorney, and he's very combative and always is looking for something where he can challenge the state. And this goes to if he still feels like there's a chance they can raise reasonable doubt in the jury's mind that there even was a crime and that Jennifer even died in that home on the day that they say. So he's going to continue to challenge, number one, whether or not there was blood found in the home, but number two, he also may use it later just to get at the issue of perhaps an incomplete investigation, or that the investigators too early made their decision as to what happened in the home and maybe excluded other alternative possibilities. So he may eventually tie this up in a closing by going after the investigation and saying it was either incomplete or it was overly focused on one possibility.
Fascinating to hear what else that testing can find, too. The judge mulling over that over this long holiday weekend. Judge Randolph made sure to specify that Jennifer can be referred to as an alleged victim instead of a victim. Why is that the case?
Well, because I think the first issue that the prosecution has to prove is that she's dead. And if she's not dead, and if there's no evidence that she's been taken somewhere else against her will, then she is not, under any definition of the law, a victim.
And I'll just say, I think this is a very smart decision by Attorney Schoenhorn. If it often in a murder case, it's not a question whether or not someone is a victim. If someone's found shot in their home or in the street, there's no sort of dispute that this person is a victim in the case. Here, he has made sure that he does not want her referred to as a victim, because if you continue to do that, the jury then may just continue with the assumption that she's a victim and she died in this case. By saying alleged victim, he reminds the jury that this is an element the state's going to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
And we, the folks that are not on this jury, all know that there has been no body that's been found. We know toward the end of last year when that probate court declared Jennifer Dulos dead. But that's all information that the jury has not been presented with so far. There's only been less than a dozen witnesses so far. The witness list includes potentially hundreds of names. So how do you see the flow of these witnesses progressing?
Well, I think initially, and at least so far, the trial has gotten off to a very slow start because of the fact we're in the evidence collection stage of the case. I think the trial will speed up as the weeks go on, and eventually we'll get to a point where the focus of the trial becomes Michelle Troconis and not so much Fotis Dulos.
Does it help the defense at this point, 3 days in, 2 days in, potentially, that we have not heard Michelle Troconis' name so far? The jury hasn't?
I think it does. The jury will be told, don't decide the case early, don't make any decisions as the case is going on, but I'm certain the jury is aware. When are we going to hear about Michelle Troconis? And this essentially is a two-trial case. There's a trial against Fotis Dulos to show that Jennifer was killed and that she was killed at Fotis Dulos' hands. Only then can the state kind of pivot and say, well, also we believe that Michelle was aware of this and conspired prior to it happening, but that she then helped cover it up through the tampering and the hindering charge. So I'm sure the jury's aware. It's going to be a while till we hear Michelle, and I'm sure the defense is hoping. They're noticing how little they hear about Michelle versus Fotis Dulos.
Anything initially, while the jury is seeing these initial crime scenes, the defense is looking for as far as the presentation, the collection of evidence, the photographs, what sort of things are you looking for as far as laying the groundwork for the jury?
Well, from the prosecutor's perspective, they need to lay the foundation for the subsequent testing. From the defense perspective, Attorney Schoenhorn wants to establish that maybe the police weren't as methodical and careful as they were believed to be. That could become a theme throughout the trial, that the investigation in this case is subpar, that it's skewed, that it's biased. So even in the early stages of the case where you're dealing with small pieces of evidence, it can become the foundation for an argument or a theme throughout the case that this is an investigation skewed against Michelle Troconis.
And is that what you as defense attorneys, when we see a lot of note-taking going on, even when the prosecution is still bringing their witnesses to the stand, is that note-taking really leading up to those details that could potentially help you make a turn in this?
Yes, you're going to note key statements made by witnesses or key things that, especially if you can tie together 3, 4, 5 pieces of evidence into one theme, especially in a closing argument. Number one, as the trial goes on, the jury's going to pick up, oh, this came up again, that maybe the police didn't quite collect this evidence correctly, or maybe they rushed by a test they could have done. The jury picks up on that. But then in a closing, if you can tie together 3, 4, 5 instances of that and say, look, you know, it's the state's burden here to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you have questions about this investigation, that can go to your reasonable doubt. That's what they're picking up on.
All right, a lot to watch here. Much more analysis from our experts coming up next. We'll talk with Trent and Mike about what moments have stood out so far to them in this high-profile criminal trial. More on the inside the Michelle Troconis trial when we come back. Welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. I'm joined once again by attorneys Michael Fitzpatrick and Trent Lima. You guys have been following this case, especially with the critical eye that you both have being defense attorneys that has gone on for several years now. What has stood out to you so far as for these first 2 days of the trial?
The absence of a massive amount of blood in the garage. It does not square with the narrative that the state police put out. I think people have been led to believe that there was a massive amount of blood found in the garage, and that's probably where she was killed. And now with only a few droplets, a handful of droplets, it throws that theory into complete disarray.
It's one thing to read it in the arrest warrant. It's another to see it on video. And this is where that visual component is so important. Trent, what stood out to you so far?
I would agree with that in that the amount of blood, for instance, on the car was not a very large amount. And as much as, I mean, obviously part of the state's claim is going to be that there was a massive cleanup operation. But the more complete that cleanup operation was, the more time the prosecution is going to have to say it took. And that's going to become an issue I'm sure John Schoenhorn will exploit. The other thing I'm mostly interested in is at what point do they get into evidence that Michelle Troconis knew about what Fotis Dulos was going to do allegedly to Jennifer before he did it? At what point, what evidence do they have there was a conspiracy before? Not just that she was along with him afterwards, hiding evidence, et cetera, where she's on video. What evidence do they have that she knew about this and made an agreement with him to commit murder prior to Fotis Dulos doing that. I'm curious when that evidence comes in.
Even those alibi scripts that the investigators called Michelle Troconis admits were written after Jennifer Dulos went missing. Thank you both so much. We appreciate your insight and input and hope to have you back. NBC Connecticut is bringing you exclusive, in-depth coverage of the trial of Michelle Troconis on multiple platforms. I'll be taking you inside the trial every weekday at 9 a.m. on our NBC Connecticut streaming channel, and I'll be joined by a team of experts to help me break down the case. They include Brian Foley, the former spokesperson for the Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, Eric Carita, a forensic DNA consultant, attorneys Jim Bergen, Michael Fitzpatrick, and Trenton Lima, who you heard from today. Eric will be joining us on tomorrow's show. That wraps up our exclusive Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis streaming special. You can watch the trial live on our streaming channels when court starts around 10 a.m. And we will have live coverage on NBC Connecticut starting with the news at 4. Be sure to join us weekdays at 9 a.m. for more in-depth analysis on the trial as it unfolds. Thanks for watching.